What is going on, everyone? Welcome on into Open Ice Hits, an NHL podcast. That's right, we're breaking down everything around the league. On today's episode, we have some fantastic discussions. Patty Kane, 400th goal. You got the crazy Sharks-Blues game the other night. 13 goals scored. It was wild. The North Division's getting a little hectic. We have Johnny Gaudreau doing the weekly Calgary Flames check-in, so a lot on the table. But I'll start off by asking my fantastic co-host, Kevin Durso, how he's doing. So, Durso, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, bro. It's another great week of hockey, and it's been great to catch up on all of that stuff, and got a lot of good topics for tonight.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think where we should start is the Chicago Blackhawks team. Watching Patty Kane score his 400th, it was ridiculous. First off, the goal was beautiful and outstanding. And
When's it not?
Yeah, you're not wrong there. Every time he has the puck, those mittens are nasty. Is there anyone? Ooh, I guess there probably are. But how many people are in that category of filthy hands like Patty Kane? What are a couple names that come to your mind right from the jump?
McDavid and Matthews, probably.
Okay,
That's a good place to start.
I go Johnny Gaudreau, to be honest with you.
Well, of course you do, but that's not, I'm not saying he doesn't qualify either, but the first two that pop into my mind, I mean, McDavid's ridiculous. And then, Austin Matthews, and it's something we'll definitely get into later when, like we said, we're breaking down the North Division too, because we're talking to Johnny tonight. We were robbed, I think, of a truly prime matchup between those two because Austin Matthews wasn't able to play. And that's a shame because it's always great to see those two on the ice together at the same time, playing against each other, and the dynamic that both of them bring to their teams because of how great they are.
No doubt about it, for sure. And yeah, we'll get into that matchup. We'll get into what Mitch Marner did in that game because I was not critical of him. I knew how nasty he was. But from a superstar perspective, I said something, and maybe I take it back. But we'll get into all that stuff for sure. Let's start with Patty Kane because as soon as I saw him score that 400, there was a question that popped into my brain. And I was really thinking about this Chicago team, and we've seen them. We've seen them win Stanley Cups over and over and over again. And painfully, the one in Philadelphia right in our own backyard. So that sucked. But I just wonder, how much is left in the tank? Do you think that there's enough in Patty Kane? Now, we don't have an update on Taves, but I'm looking more big picture, not so much just this season. DeBrincat and Kubalik, they have players here. Where do they stand?
You had to bring up that 2010 winner, right? That goes back to before I was covering the team and stuff like that. But I always point out that I'm pretty sure just about every single time I've seen Patrick Kane play in Philadelphia, he takes a shot from the same spot on the ice every single time.
Well,
no
now
doubt
there's
about
Carter Hart in it, and it's not Michael Layton or Moose.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you're big on Moose now. Okay.
Big Moose guy.
Well, anyway, to go back to the question itself, though, it's hard to imagine Kane without Taves. They've been together for their entire careers. They've won together. They built this dynasty in Chicago around, together. They were the two leaders of the team, and they both signed contracts on like the same day or something like that, or right around the same time. It was announced at the same time. They were signed for 8 years, and that was the future of the Chicago Blackhawks. And I think it happened right after the Cup year. I think it was that their entry-level contracts were up after the first Cup, so they were building for that future. And Taves isn't there this year, and that's kind of, first of all, that's a shame because I think Taves is, people talk about how calm, cool, and collected he is all the time, and that's an absence for sure. But Kane's got his 400th goal of his career, and he's tied for second in the league in scoring because he got 34 points already this year, and they've played I have to go look 23 games now, so it's like. It's incredible how he continues to do it. Now, and I'm not saying that means he was going to lose anything by any stretch, but so much of a product of a goal scorer like Kane is a player like Taves who does a lot of the other things really well and can score in his own right. So he's doing this without Kane, or without Taves, and maybe that has to do with the guys you mentioned, with the DeBrincat, with Kubalik, guys like that who are very skilled and coming up through the league.
I just wonder though, because they had a window and they thought, all right, let's go back and get Andrew Shaw and let's go back and get all these players that we won a Stanley Cup with, and they tried to redo it. It's almost like with the Eagles, they were like, hey, let's run it back. We have this window, and they were not right with their assessment. But now I do sense that there's this new vibe with this team, and they have some younger talent, and it's almost like maybe it's not there yet, and maybe it won't even line up with the current contracts of Patty Kane and Taves, and maybe they gotta assess what they're gonna do there. But it does seem like there's this fresh new, open window here that's ready to start prying open. Do you disagree or agree with that?
There could be. I think that the area where I need to see it more is defensively. They're still hanging on to those years of Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook and guys like that. And it's like at some point in time, you do have to move on from those guys and find the next generation that's going to lead you in that area too. Yeah, same thing with goaltending as well. They don't, and that wasn't even their calling card in those years because Corey Crawford had a really good career. Obviously, he was part of those teams, but they won a cup with Andy Niemi, and that's a name that is pretty much forgotten at this point after his career was over. He was somebody who didn't come up all that much. And, you saw the way that those games went in that first cup year, the high scoring games, a lot of goals. And that's what helped them win was all of these guys. It was Kane and Taves. And those years you're talking about Patrick Sharp and guys like that who were just as good offensively. And they do need, I think that Kane and Taves down the road and whenever Taves comes back and Kane where he is now in his career, they're the guys that are going to play probably that Patrick Sharp role down the road or that veteran role that you need to have, but you have to have it for the future. And I think at forward, they have some guys because another name that we didn't mention yet, who I think is off to a great start this year is Pia Suter, who is having a really incredible start to his career at this point. But I just don't know who the guys defensively are really going to be that you sit there and you go, that's the next guy. Like, I believe, isn't their top defenseman still Calvin DeHaan? And it's like, okay, he's been around the block a little bit. And I don't know if he's the guy who you say that's the cornerstone piece of a championship quality team. He's a really great player. And I think he brings so many of the small things to the game defensively, but I wonder who that guy is, who you say that's the guy who's going to step up and be what Duncan Keith was to those cup teams.
Oh, no, for sure. When I say like a window is opening up, I don't think that they're ready to, be built to go win a Stanley Cup anytime soon. But I do sense that it's a quick turnaround. I don't think that they're a team that's going to be down in the dumps for years and try and refine themselves. Like, I do see younger talent already starting to form, and I think it'll be like a quicker transition for this window to kind of reopen and pry open. Not so much, hey, in 2 years they're going to go win a Stanley Cup, but I just see the organizational transition maybe happening before our eyes, and maybe they don't have to go through a painful stretch unless, and I kind of alluded to it, the timeline of this Patrick Kane and this Jonathan Toews. Let's say the deals run out. Is it a no-brainer lock that they're 4 lifers in Chicago, or is this a situation where when Patty Kane and Toews are up, they're out of there and they're going to try and hit the refresh button in another way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you kind of can't blame them for everything they've done too. Because I was going to touch on what you were saying about that too. Like when you've won 3 times over with the same guys, you kind of still want to keep trying for that next one. And you think you have a shot the year after and the year after that. And they really haven't been that team, for the last several years. So that's kind of where I wonder where they go from here, because now for a few years there, they were kind of on that trending in the other direction, from being the cup contender and still having that window open. I mean, you think about how things have kind of come full circle for the league as well, because Tampa was that team they played in the final in the last cup year. So Chicago was still at the top of the ranks there, and Tampa was looking like they were going to knock on the door, and it took them 5 years to finally get that cup, so I wonder if, now is that time where you have to go through the retooling process and how much longer you have with these guys, because they've been around. I think their first year was 2007, 2008. So you're talking about, they were 3 years into their career when they won the first cup. They won 2 more within the next 5 years after that. So they were building a dynasty. And it's like, at some point in time, you have to move on from that. I don't know that I can see it's like the conversation we had with Crosby. I don't know if I can see Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews wearing another uniform, but sometimes the time runs out on certain situations. And if that window is closed, that one from that time, then you have to move on. You have to give the roles to somebody else.
Well, here's another thought. Are we getting tricked by maybe the Central Division? And I know a few episodes ago we had this conversation of how competitive it is, but there are some teams that we expected to be better or maybe a little bit more in the mix, and they're not. The Dallas Stars, although they had some COVID issues, and Columbus is falling apart. Not that we had high expectations, but they're always a hard-fought, gritty team, and it seems like right now they're down in the dumps a bit. And I just wonder, do we look at where Chicago is right now, and maybe it's a product of the surroundings that's tricking maybe me on where they really are? Look, you're only playing the Central. This year's a little bit wonky, and not everyone's off to these great starts. There's no fans in the stands. Am I being fooled because of the surrounding pieces and the surrounding storylines with COVID and where the NHL is right now?
Yeah, that's interesting because we're getting closer and closer for some of these teams, and Chicago's at 23 games played. So is Columbus. Like these, you're coming up on the halfway point of the year. 28 games is the halfway point on the season.
And where is Chicago right now with their record in those 28?
12-7-4 in their third place in a division with 28 points.
Right.
And 1 point off of the lead right now, which truthfully isn't saying much because of the fact that they've played 3 more games than everybody else. They've got 3 more than Florida, 4 more than Tampa, 3 more than Carolina right behind them. The only thing you can say for them is that they're now 7 points up on Columbus with the same number of games played, which is significant because now that's 5. So you're kind of comfortably in the top 4 right now. And that's saying something. But, it's weird that we kind of can't get a grasp on some of these teams almost halfway through the year. We're still sitting there going, well, what is it? Is it a product of the success within the division? And granted, you have to take that for what it is because the first 2 rounds of the playoffs are going to be this. So if they can beat the teams in their division, then they've got a shot to be one of the final 4 teams in the playoffs. And I don't know that we would have been saying that, even going back to last year. They were a 12 seed and they won a series and managed to make some things interesting. And now they're competing in a division where the top 4 get to move on and be in the playoffs. And they're right up there, and they're doing it with a lot of, like we talked about, the same cast of characters for the most part. They're doing it with a lot of the same guys, and they're doing it without their captain.
Yeah, it's so wild. And another team, I don't know if I mentioned them, was Nashville. I mean, here's a squad that you would have never anticipated them being this low on the totem pole. Now I'm hearing the reports about the GM saying, hey, we're not making these crazy moves because there was some speculation that, hey, maybe they make a move with the GM. Maybe they make these major changes. Well, ironically enough, being in the Philly area, there is some drama surrounding Ekholm, which I wouldn't be disappointed in because they need help defensively. But that's another team that can't find their groove at all, and it looks like they're going to be a mess. So right now, with the Chicago Blackhawks, we'll transition a little bit to some of the Central teams. What's the biggest surprise other than the Chicago for you? Because I look at Nashville as one of them, but also Dallas. And you got to keep in mind what happened to them earlier this season, which throws everything out of whack. But they were in the Stanley Cup Finals last year, and now they just look internally like a dumpster fire.
This is a great transition point because of the fact that it brings these 3 teams together, Chicago, Nashville, Dallas, to talk about the dynamic of when you're the Chicago Blackhawks and you've won 3 Stanley Cups and you're still trying to work with that same core and you think that you have a couple years left and the window's still open. You're talking about Nashville made a cup final and Dallas made a cup final and they didn't win. And now they've struggled to seemingly get back to that point. Now Dallas is playing the follow-up season, so we don't know that for sure. But Nashville hasn't been the same team since that year. And it just kind of goes to show how quickly, I got asked, how's Pecorine doing in Nashville? And I went, well, he's backing up now, and it's like, whoa, really? Yeah, really? Because
he was even falling apart through those playoff series too, though. If you remember, he was getting destroyed.
And it doesn't take away from what he's done over the years. He was about as reliable as they come. He was probably the best goalie in hockey for, arguably for a good stretch of time there. But it happens when you start to work around that time frame and you think that you're in the window at the moment, but it closes quickly because of one factor or another, then it closes quickly. And they, the thing is that doesn't make sense about Nashville is, and same thing with Dallas, possibly. They have good teams on paper. We're looking at these teams going, they should be better than what they are so far. But I think it's the dynamic of playing teams back to back. It's the scheduling the way it is. You get to see these teams so often. And it might be hard to build the momentum when another team gets to play you again right away and come right back at you. And maybe Chicago's really good at doing that over the years because of, you could even look at all the playoff experience and go, well, these guys on Dallas haven't had that kind of playoff experience, or the Nashville guys haven't had that kind of playoff experience, even for making a final. So maybe that's where it goes as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's just so crazy. You watch that team with Jamie Benn and you watch that team with Tyler Seguin last year. And I hate to do this because I feel like I'm taking away from certain teams and certain players. But when I was watching the NBA playoffs last year, I watched the Jimmy Butler Miami Heat team make this wild run and go all the way to the finals. And it came out of nowhere. And I sit here today and I really do wonder if it was because of the environment. the stoppage. Here comes a season that's put on hold, and here's this Jimmy Butler 5th seed type team that goes all the way to the NBA Finals. And when we watch the Dallas Stars, did that happen last year? And I hate this too, is with these championships. When you look around today's era, I always ask myself, 10 years from now, do we look back at some of these championships and laugh and take away credit because of the circumstances when there's 25,000 in the stadiums again 10 years from now? And how do we value these? And when the Tampa Bay Lightning win the Cup, they were one of the best teams in the NHL, so you don't fault them. The Dodgers win the World Series. They were the best team. They probably would have won it with fans, so you don't fault it. Basketball, same thing. But what about who they played? Does that ever come back into context? And with the Stars, it's a similar question I just asked with the Chicago Blackhawks, but is it a product of where we are today more so than how insanely talented they really are? Or is that too harsh? I don't know. I'm trying to look for answers.
Yeah, I wish I had more of them for you, to be honest. I mean, the part of the problem, and you already said what part of the problem is that they've played the fewest games in the division because they had a COVID issue. And, that is what it is. And like, I'm still trying to figure out what that team is, but I also look and I go, they're barely past the quarter mark. We're talking about teams coming up on the halfway point. Chicago's 5 games away from being halfway through their season. Dallas is 2 games over the quarter mark. So there's a lot of gap there to make up some opportunity and see where it goes. But I don't know how successful that can make a team even then, because of the fact that you take the scheduling of it. Forget the environment of it, the scheduling of it, where you're asking a team who missed a week or 2 out of their schedule, had all these games postponed. Dallas had a third situation because of the weather the last week. So they couldn't play games for another week. So they were trying to take 3 weeks of games and make them up later in the year. And that means they're going to be playing way more often than any other team. And that could just fatigue them to no end. And that could take them right out of the picture because they're playing so often. They don't have the legs to keep up with everybody else who's rested and who gets the typical day or 2 off or whatever it is. And does that ruin the structure of the whole thing? Like, Dallas is a good team, but they didn't have a fair advantage because they lost this time and were forced to make up all the games. That's the questions that we have to ask at this point. We don't really have the answers for it because it just is what it is. The situations are what they are. And I feel like, maybe that's the best part of the North Division, is the fact that the North Division hasn't had those problems. So we're sitting there just looking at it going, this is as legitimate as it gets. And I do really believe, I believe last year and I believe this year, you're still getting a legitimate champion because it's going to be tough. Whoever you play, it's going to be tough. We've had this conversation when we talk about the Flyers. The East Division, you're going to play somebody who's really good in the first round, and then you're going to play somebody even better in the second round, probably. And that's your ticket to the Final Four. And I don't know how you can't feel that that's legitimate when you've beat up on these guys all year, played against the same opponents, have to now play a playoff series against them, win 4 times, and then you get to finally play somebody different. And when you do play somebody different, it's a whole new learning experience because you haven't scouted that team. You haven't faced them yet. You have no idea what they bring. So I think it's going to be even more legitimate because of that. But it's really creating some gigantic questions here in the early going of the season.
That's a great point, for real. When you look at this division and how you see what teams you're going to have to play, how can you possibly look at that as some sort of negative? You still have to play these insanely talented teams that have unbelievable skill and fantastic coaches and great decors and great goaltending. So you still got to get through that. I'm with you. I never would downgrade or look down upon a championship, but who knows? Who knows how people feel about this so far away from where we are living now. Now it's easy to say, well, it's legitimate. Look, you can't really, there's a pandemic. What are you going to do? But 15 years from now, maybe it's a lot different because we're just in a different environment with sports and with the world. Hopefully we're in a different spot. But look, we had a fantastic game of hockey on. I'm losing track of days. Was this Saturday night? People are claiming this arguably the best game you will get all season between the Blues and the Sharks. And I remember I was in my office here doing some work, and I had it on my side TV. And nonstop, I'm like, holy hell, this third period's nuts. Goal after goal. There were 5 goals in the second, 5 goals in the third, and then the Binnington thing happened where Binnington gets yanked. He walks up to Carlson, throws a fake punch, goes up to Dubnyk in the net, and they kind of give each other a couple how-do-you-dos, and he just skates off the ice. What the hell? I couldn't believe it. I thought Dubnyk was going to give him a mean shot to the face.
Yeah, that was wild. It's funny. I distinctly remember a moment, and this was probably may have been a year or two before he was really in with St. Louis and really on his way to being a cup champion and all that stuff like that. He had an incident, and because of my coverage with the Flyers, I was watching a lot of during that summer. The Lehigh Valley Phantoms were going further in the playoffs. I think the Flyer season was over. They didn't make the playoffs, so they got knocked out in the first round. It was one of the two. And the Phantoms were putting together a run. And one of the series was against the Providence Bruins, and their goaltender, lo and behold, was Jordan Binnington at that time. And I remember a game where he was on his way off the ice before an intermission. And he just took a shot at a guy. He just literally threw a punch at him
That's
because he
insane.
didn't like something. And so it's like, where does this temper come from? And I remember thinking the year that he was having all that success with St. Louis, you're going, this guy, the guy who literally, when he was being beat up in a game, in a minor league game, was ready to take on a guy who's way smaller, and just because he didn't like the way, because he's a gritty player and things like that, he didn't like it, so he took a shot at him. Like, I can't believe that this guy's having the NHL success now, and everybody's just can't seem, not can't seem to wrap their head around it, but everybody's going nuts about this guy. And sure enough, he not only was he doing it in the playoffs at that point, he won a Stanley Cup. He helped the team, the St. Louis Blues, win a Stanley Cup, and then he had a really good year to follow it. So you're going, okay, but this was like, that took me right back to that moment, because I'm going, I remember this minor league moment where the guy had a temper and the guy let the emotions get the best of him, and he was ready to go after somebody because he didn't like the way things were going or whatever it was. And
That's crazy.
that's what it took. That's what it took me back to. Exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a good story, and it puts it in perspective that this isn't the first time that he has lost his cool. And I mean, clearly you're going to be upset. You're going to be bothered when you get yanked. But when I saw the camera go to Craig Berube, because you got to remember he took a 2-minute penalty for unsportsmanlike conduct.
Yeah.
And you know, Chief, you know how he operates and all. And he was a tough man in his day and whatnot. But coming from a coach's perspective and a mindset now, I don't know. If you were, I'm just put yourself in his shoes, and your goalie in Binnington ends up taking a penalty like that, and then the backup comes in and actually plays pretty well and somewhat calms things down for the Blues, and they end up winning the game. Do you go back to Binnington? Do you sit him down? Do you make a statement? What is your reaction to that? That's one of those penalties I know if I was a coach, that wouldn't sit right with me. But you got to also remember, you're now a professional. And that's a little different than being on a U18, AAA team, or playing junior, or, being at a different level. You got to trust your top players to bounce back, respond, but you also have to draw the line and show a little bit of commitment to, you got to know what's right and wrong. I would be pissed, though. I would be pissed.
And I'm sure they were. I don't think it changes how they approach the next game or anything like that, because there's too much of a history there now. I mean, you watch this guy change your season around 2 years ago and get you to the promised land. I mean, in a matter of 6 months, they went from last place in the league in January to top of the world in June, and he was a big part of it, obviously, because I remember back in, I think it was 2018, 2019. So it was around the time of the Stadium Series game in Philadelphia. And I remember we were all like sitting in the press room before the game started that night, and he won another game in a shootout. And we're going, he's got another win, and he just seems to keep piling them on. And all of a sudden, like we were thinking about how he had made I don't think it was his first start, but he had his first career shutout against the Flyers the month before. And we're going, maybe that wasn't as much of a fluke as everybody thought it was then. Like, oh, the Flyers are not that good of a team, and the Blues being in last place in the league, maybe it wasn't as much of a fluke as we thought. So I don't think you change your approach with him. I do think you're frustrated with him. I do think maybe you do talk to him a little bit and just say, hey, listen, you can't be going and doing stuff like that. If I'm San Jose, I'm certainly remembering that next time I play this team, because
the Sharks stink.
They do.
They stink. They have no goaltending. They don't know what you're going to do with that Erik Karlsson contract. He really hasn't been the same player since the injury. By the way, just for a little context here, I wrote down their record. They're 7-9-2 in last place in the West.
Yeah, and see, you know what? That's an interesting point, because I wonder if that's where the frustration comes from Binnington's end. Like, we're getting beat up by a team that's in last place in the division. We're supposed to be this team that is near the top, and they are near the top, but they're supposed to be having maybe you have a game where it's not quite going right for you against Vegas, against Colorado, one of those situations, because you know what to expect. And they've had some good battles over the years since St. Louis kind of got back up to that ranking and near the top, and Colorado's been there with their core group, and Vegas has been there for the 3-4 years that they've been in existence. but not San Jose. And San Jose is another one of those teams, by the way, that's not that far removed from a cup final
You
appearance,
read
by
my
the way.
damn mind. I had that written down in my brain. Like, I'm going to bring this up. They fit the same category as Nashville almost.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know what to think about that one because I've heard enough things about Martin Jones over the years that it's like, he's not the greatest goalie. He had a really, really great year, and it seems like that's more of the outlier than the rest of them. And, but you're right. They've got so much invested in so many guys when you think about not just the Carlson contract, but you think about Brent Burns' career and you think about Evander Kane and, all those guys, and the changes that they've made over the years too. I mean, you go back to that cup year and you're thinking the year they went to the cup final and you're going Joe Thornton, Joe Pavelski, these are guys that have since moved on. They're playing,
Right.
Joe Pavelski was playing in a cup final last September,
I'm looking up this because I know this contract is insane. So they still, oh my Lord, they still have. I mean, you got to remember, it's 11.5 on the books for 6 more seasons of Erik Karlsson at $11.5 million per year. You're not getting the same production out of him. And by the way, with Binnington, if he's getting all pissed off about losing to a bad team, I mean, you mentioned Evander Kane. He was letting in muffins for Evander Kane to come in and just walk in and throw one on net, and it squeaks by. I mean, shame on you. Yeah, he's obviously pissed off with himself, but shame on you. I'm not claiming you had the best help either, but man, you can't be allowing muffins in left and right. But that game was, talk about entertaining, not being invested emotionally and just watching goals go in left and right. To see the reactions all the time, you had the sirens going off. That's what made me look over every second. The siren just kept going off.
Yeah, it's just, we've seen a few of these this year too. I mean, there's been some high scoring games around the league in general. But this one might take the cake for right now because this is the highest scoring game I can remember in a long time. A 7-6, and not even that, but like sometimes we've seen these high scoring games and it's one team's got the 7, but the other one has 3, and you go, well, that's not, it's a high scoring game, but that's a blowout. It was competitive completely the whole time.
And by the way, the Blues, I think I saw a report on NHL.com earlier. Tarasenko might be in play pretty soon for this team to get back. And, I mean, we know how important he could be to your franchise. I don't know what to expect right from the jump coming off of an injury like that. But if you are eventually able to get him back into rhythm by the end of the season when you're ready to make a serious push, that makes this team even scarier to what they already are. And I guess before we move along, losing a defenseman, losing a captain the way that they did, how do you think that they've responded to that loss?
Well, pretty well, because they're doing a lot of things right. And, I've liked their team for a while at this point. I think that the guys that you've seen step up more and more, I mean, they made a lot of adjustments defensively to try to fill the void as things were going on. And it pretty much started around the cup year anyway, because they had to get some, like any team that's in contention like that, you try to get some reinforcements and you try to get some added pieces that maybe put you over the top for the playoff push. I think that having Justin Falk and Marco Scandella have been huge for them this year. Those two guys have been outstanding. I think, because I think about Parayko's out of the lineup right now. You've lost Pietrangelo. You're trying to fill the void with Krug, but Krug is not the same type of defenseman that Pietrangelo is. So that makes a difference. I've always liked their forward group, and that's why I think the Tarasenko point is great, because Tarasenko is the flash of this team. They've got a lot of good forwards, but a lot of their forwards are the tougher guys, the gritty guys. Ryan O'Reilly doesn't play a pretty game, but he's a successful player, and people love watching that.
I love that you just brought that up real quick, though, because, I've actually heard pretty damn recently, and I swear to God, everything always comes back to this, but Claude Giroux, you can't win with Claude Giroux being your guy. And what I thought of instantly when I was just informed that was, in what world would you ever sit here before the Blues won the cup and said you could win a cup if Ryan O'Reilly is your guy? Seriously, though, I love Ryan O'Reilly. He is a dog. He's so much fun to watch, and he has elevated his game and his team's game. But let's be realistic. Prior to winning the cup, did anyone say Ryan O'Reilly is a leader that will bring you a championship as your guy?
Probably not. And, I don't think there was a lot of guys on the team that people would have said that about. I don't think people are sitting there saying, oh, by the way, you can lean on David Perron. You can lean on Braden Shen. You can these were like almost like the secondary pieces of their teams that came over and happened to get around a guy who has all-world skill in Tarasenko and a defensive core that was going to be very successful because of Pietrangelo. And I mean, you got to remember at the time, you got to think about the guys that they had on that cup team too. It's changed drastically since then in a lot of ways, but that's what they had. And they had a couple of these guys who were just secondary pieces wherever they played. And I think that even now, like, their big pickup was Mike Hoffman. And I almost don't even know where exactly he fits on the team. Not that he's not a fit, but like I don't know where you would say he fits because I don't think he's like
shot though, based off of circumstances. Anyone for the Mike Hoffman experience, I think no matter where you were, worth a shot for sure.
Yeah, but I'm not saying he doesn't fit on the team. I'm sitting there going though, like in terms of you think of him as one of Ottawa's top scorers, and then he went to Florida and he had a really successful couple of years there or a season there, or whatever it was. But when you look at O'Reilly, Perron, Shen, Jaden Schwartz, and then Tarasenko's coming back. Well, where does Hoffman fit into that group? He was almost like on your third line at that point. And that's a scary thought when you have that kind of depth that Mike Hoffman, a guy who can score 40 a year if he really wanted to, can be on your third line.
Yeah, no doubt. That's a great point. Yeah, I was just saying, in general, I mean, I remember when the deal was signed, everyone was like, huh? Because wasn't it a weird, almost like a tryout?
It was a PTO, which was basically, I think that was just,
it was.
It was formality.
It
was formality, exactly, just to get him into the situation, and then they could sign him later. And but it was still strange to see the headline. That's what the strange part was. It's like, here's the guy who everybody seemed to be talking about this offseason. This is pretty much the top forward out there, and he didn't land with anybody in particular. It was kind of like a waiting game. And all it was for him to sign a tryout, like it's like that. Then why wasn't everybody knocking the door down to get him on a tryout?
Let's be realistic though. That's a pretty brutal free agency class. If Mike Hoffman is your top dog, let's be realistic. But
yeah, it is.
Yeah. But hey, let's throw it over right now to our interview with Johnny Gaudreau. He had some very interesting things to say. And now we are joined by Johnny Gaudreau of the Calgary Flames. Johnny, thank you so much for joining this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Hunter.
Absolutely. All right, so let's take a broad approach here to what happened this past week. You guys, after the Battle of Alberta, beat the Toronto Maple Leafs, then you lost 2-1 in overtime, and then you split with the Ottawa Senators. So not too much diving too deep into them specifically yet, but overall, just a broad approach. How do you assess this past week?
Yeah, wasn't our best week, I don't think. Personally, just looking back, I think we were real close to winning the other game against Toronto. They scored to tie it up with a minute left there, and then next thing you know, you lose that game, then you go into Ottawa thinking you should have had come out of there with 4 points. You only come out of there with 3 instead, and then Ottawa came out pretty hard on us, and kind of smoked us 6-1, and then kind of did the opposite to them the next game. We were a little embarrassed there, and found a way to win and changed some lines up and made a few changes, so it was good.
When we talked last week, the team was going through a rough stretch, but you come in 2 wins this week. By the record, it's like you said, it's maybe not quite where you want to be. 2 wins, 2 losses, but you get 5 out of 8 points, and particularly the game on Saturday. Is that closer to a step in the right direction for what you guys want to be?
Yeah, I think the game on Saturday was a lot more of our style of gameplay. We know we're an offensive team, and we can shut down defensively. We have a real good 2 goaltenders, and so we were really happy with the way we played. But like I said, I mean, it's you got to forget about it right away and move on to the next game. And I'm sure they're not going to be too happy the way they played, and probably going to come out hard tomorrow night. So that's a big game for us tomorrow night.
How big was that game against Toronto, though, the first one? So you're coming off the Battle of Alberta. You're playing a Toronto Maple Leafs team that has a lot of buzz. Everyone's all big and in on this Toronto squad right now. They have a great record, and they're playing hot. And you go out there and win 3-0 to get off the schneid a bit. So how big was that first game to start that last week off?
Yeah, it was huge. I mean, we played really well. Obviously, our special teams was really good. Our power play went scored all 3 goals. Our PK was out there 7 times against probably arguably one of the most talented, power plays in the league, with the Maple Leafs and Matthews and Marner and all them. So we were really impressed with the way our special teams was, and we were right there. We held them to 1 goal again. The next game we played them, and they scored a late one and then one in overtime, which was unfortunate. But I thought we played well in those 2 games, and then had a little hiccup against Ottawa, but got back on track. Yesterday and had a big win against them.
Juuso Välimäki scored his first goal of the season on Saturday. It's just the second goal of his career, too. And you set him up for that goal. I've really been impressed by a lot of the intangibles for him and what he's been able to bring. But how exciting is it when a guy like that scores a goal and doesn't frequently score a goal?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's a younger player. I haven't really seen him too much. He has been fighting with injuries for a while now. So this is his first real season with us. So I thought it was his first goal at first, and he's like, I scored, Johnny, like in the huddle, and I'm like, oh crap, I don't. But it's been a while since he scored, so but he was fired up, and to see a young guy score like that, you could see how excited he was in his eyes and his celebration after. So it was great for him, and hopefully he can keep going like this, because he's a smart player. He's young, but he's a smart player.
That actually reminds me, Johnny, of when I scored my first high school bingo because you got benched for screaming at your teammate and your dad wasn't too happy. Do you remember that moment?
No.
Come on, dude. For real? You don't remember that? I kicked the puck in front of the net. I got a nice shift. Come on. It was a playoff game, John, without me.
No,
you know what I mean?
I remember it. I just said no because I didn't want to. I obviously got benched by the Pops, so it wasn't my brightest time. But I think we were winning like 6-1, 7-1,
yes, we were.
right?
Yes, we were. I got that last one. But since we're on the topics of your teammates, I was watching a little bit of the pregame show when you guys were playing Ottawa, and the broadcast was talking about Rasmus Andersson, saying he's young, there's going to be hiccups along the way. But what have you seen to this point that really impresses you out of his game?
Yeah, he's really smart with the puck. Obviously, he's on our top power play unit, so he's done a real good job, moving into there after we lost Gustafson. So he's done a great job moving into that role, and he can see the ice really well. He brings some grit and a great teammate off the ice. So those are type of qualities you want in a teammate and a defenseman on your team. And he's going to be here for a lot of years. Just signed a nice new deal, so. It's great to see him, playing well right now for us.
I feel like every time I watch one of your games or I see a box score from it, it seems like every time I look, Andrew Mangiapane has another big goal for you guys. And just, it seems like not only is he doing that, he's scoring at critical times. What kind of boost has he been for you guys this season? Because it seems like his game is reaching a new level right now.
Oh yeah, Mangi's been playing great for us. He was, he's always been in our organization. I never knew when he was going to really make that jump and be consistent in the NHL, and he's doing it this season. He did it at the end of last season, so it took him a little bit of time, to start this season off to get going. But like I said, we kind of switched lines up last game, and he's back playing with Tkachuk a lot more now, and I think they really feel comfortable playing together. So he's doing great for us. He's obviously a smaller guy, a lot of speed, but he's playing really well for us too.
Was it last week or the week before we talked about playing with no fans, and you mentioned how, you kind of have to bring the energy and find something internally. You mentioned the jerseys being a big spark. Well, I want to know, when you're going up against the Senators and that Brady Tkachuk is on the other side, is that dynamic right there of Matthew Tkachuk and him one of those energy sparks where, look, the room knows what's going on and that brings that extra layer of energy, or am I reaching a little bit?
Yeah, you might. I mean, personally, I think, for those two, I mean, there's nothing more exciting than getting a chance to play against your brother in the NHL. I mean, your family gets to watch, your parents are excited. So I'm sure that'll, for those two, that's easily, bring some energy to them. But, for us personally, I think it's, it's another game, obviously. Doesn't really matter who's on the other side. But when you, as Matthew or Brady, those guys, to get the chance to do that, I mean, I'm sure it brings a lot of excitement for them and gets them a little bit more jacked up to playing games. So those, you got to find those little things throughout this season to, try to, get you going before games and stuff. Cause like I said, with no fans, it gets tough sometimes. So.
Yeah, I could only imagine. No, I want to bring this up, have some fun with it. Your netminder gets yanked, and then there's a video of him banging his head on the wall. That's got to be one of those moments where And maybe as time goes on, you play some jokes in the locker room about it, maybe in the dry stall area. I know you're a Friends guy, too. Reminds me of a little Monica Bang, Rachel Bangs. I'm like, that's definitely got to be one of those moments where the boys give him something afterwards, no?
Oh yeah, that was pretty. I mean, we thought it was funny. I don't think our goaltending coach didn't think it was very funny because we would have been down to our 2 starting goalies out. So, but I was just on the bench. I kind of saw the replay from behind the bench TV, and I didn't know what the heck was going on. So, I guess he was pretty rattled that he let up. I think he said it was a softie, so I let one up from the red line. But, that happens part of the game. He just got done playing against Toronto, and he was playing a back-to-back. So, and not very many goalies play back-to-backs in this league. So, I'm sure it's exhausted and stuff. But, thankfully he was wearing a mask.
Yeah, for real. All right, we'll leave you with this one, Johnny. 3 of your next 4 is against Ottawa. They're 7-15-1. How big of a stretch is this, knowing the opportunity is there to grab some points? And no team is a cakewalk in this league, no matter what their record is. But there is a nice opportunity here to grab some points. So how do you view the next 3 out of the 4?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, looking at the standings, I think we're, 2, 3, 4 points away from being in a playoff spot. So, if we can take advantage of, a team that's, kind of lower in the standings. I mean, like you said, any given night, I think any team can beat any team. I mean, that's just the way the NHL is and how, competitive it is. But, when you have the opportunity to play against a team that's, low in the standings and stuff, and, you got to try to take advantage of that and, try to string along some points. And, each game's real important. So kind of just worry about the next one here coming up and, try to grab those 2 points. And because you can tell how close we are to that playoff spot right there, that 4th and 3rd place playoff spot.
Absolutely. All right, Johnny. Well, thank you so much for checking in this week, and then we'll have you again on next week.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
No problem. Well, Durso, let me ask you this. Okay, what stood out to you? Because I know what stood out to me. It's obvious that my goal back in high school, that's when I played forward, too, right? That's how you know it was a long time ago. But without me, that 5-1 win wouldn't it taste so sweet? I made it 6-1 and put it away.
Does that mean you're taking credit for part of Johnny Hockey's career?
Well, to tell you the full
you had to get that story in there.
Of course. Look, he talked about someone, which was hilarious, by the way, didn't even realize it was not his first goal. But that was my first goal, and it all happened because he started bickering, and his dad, who was the coach, sat him down and said, you know what? I'm going to play the 4th line that never plays. Brodes, get out there. And here I am sitting in front of the net. Just boop, little JVR tip in front.
Oh, the little JVR tip.
The way over celebration for a 6-1 win with like 30 seconds left. I'm fist pumping and one knee in it. Ooh, good times. Good times.
So your reaction was the way that, it was when Zach Ronaldo would score goals or something like that, like how rare that is.
Well, the difference here, I guess, would be, because I was going to bring up Dan Carcillo's overtime against the New Jersey
that was
Devils.
actually the one that popped in my head. That was what popped in my head.
The difference is, that's an overtime game winner in the playoffs. Mine, it was playoff. It's 6-1. It's not the same, but anyway, a little bit of fun.
Your reaction is this is kind of pulling one from a few years back, but your reaction is Harry Zolnarchuk scoring his first NHL goal in like a 7-1 game or whatever the hell it was.
There you go. I think that's perfect for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, but look, we'll go here after that debacle that we just went through. This Flames team. We talked about it with Johnny, and you look at this past week, and I think this past week somewhat describes who they have been to this point, and it's very inconsistent. You beat the Maple Leafs 3-0. That's great. And then you have an opportunity to beat them again. You're up 1-0, and with a minute left, you let Nylander score, and then you let Nylander score in overtime. You let it slip. Then you get beat by the Ottawa Senators pretty good, and then you beat them. You beat them pretty good. It's like the inconsistency defines where they are now.
Yeah, it does. The first Ottawa game really surprised me because after watching them play Toronto really well, enough. I mean, let's go this way. The night of the second game that they played against Toronto, I didn't get to see any of it in the moment because I was covering Flyers Rangers that night. But I typically, what I like to do when I'm covering a game is I keep like my phone or something of that sort nearby that has the scores from the rest of the league on it so I can kind of see what else is happening. And I kind of was like sitting there in shock almost at no score through 2 periods, no score midway through the third. Like, what's going on here? This is really something. And then all of a sudden, I think I actually saw a tweet come up that they had scored first. The Calgary scored first. And I'm going, well, watch them actually take, after all of that, after talking about the Edmonton games with Johnny last week, all that, watch them come in and take 2 from Toronto and almost play off of the question I asked him a week ago about being motivated to play the team that's at the top. And now all of a sudden, and then that quickly, I saw the thing about Nylander tying the game up, and I saw he won it later, and I went back and I watched it later, and that was a hell of a shot. You got it. Sometimes, and sometimes you got to just tip your cap to him, and you just say, that's a hell of a play. Stuff happens when you're in that 3-on-3, it gets a little bit hectic, and you can miss an assignment that quickly. And a guy like that goes in and defeats you because he's got a great shot. The game against Ottawa, that first one, blew my mind. I thought for sure that it wouldn't look like that.
Bad goaltending for sure.
I can understand losing a game to Ottawa. I'm not, because every game's different, and no team can be taken for granted here. Like, you can't just assume you've got it, but I was surprised that it was that lopsided, and it happened quickly. I mean, it went from, here's 1, here's 2. Then I think when they did get 1, but then it was 3, 4, 5. Like, all of a sudden I'm going, how quickly did it go from 2-1 to 5-1? Like, now this game's over. And the same thing happened on Saturday when they played them again. Then it was the other way around, though. It was, here's 1, 2, 3 for Calgary, and they were just off to the races. And Johnny had a big part in that, obviously, because he had a pretty strong game that day. And you saw a lot of, like, that game to me is their full potential to an extent. Like, that's when Johnny Gaudreau is on his game and Sean Monahan's giving you what you expect, and then you get the contributions from the rest of the lineup. That's their full potential, but it is very inconsistent right now.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to put the pieces together. If they hang around this inconsistency, and then they just find their groove, and I even brought it up to Johnny. They play their next 3 of 4 against Ottawa. Could this be that turning point? Could this be this situation where they get on a little bit of groove? Their last game was a win against Ottawa. So let's say, and Edmonton's thrown in there, but let's say they get on a nice streak where they put together 6 points here, and they get 6 solid points, 8 points, who knows? But they put together this nice run. Will that form into more of the consistent, better team than this up and down roller coaster? But sometimes after, let's say, 25, 30 games, and your team that you follow, whatever team it is, gives you this up and down, sometimes you're waiting forever and ever and ever, and the reality of the situation is that is who they are. And I like to always tie this to another sport, so I will tie this to the Eagles. When you watch the Eagles win such a big game, the difference is 16 games, but when you see them have such a solid win, let's say they go on the road and they beat the New Orleans Saints. Well, it's like, damn, your ceiling is the New Orleans Saints. I've seen you do that. So when you watch the Calgary Flames put a beat down on a good team, it's, whoa, I've seen you do that. But the problem is, you gotta find eventually something that clicks and where you can put it all together night in and night out. And sometimes those teams where you see that big win, sometimes that's a fluke and you are that roller coaster team. And I really hope it's not the case for Calgary, but I do sense that it has to somewhat come up soon, or I am going to be bought into they are just an inconsistent team.
Yeah, this might be their best shot right now to change that narrative a little bit. And I wonder if the week would look different, because you heard Johnny say about how it was kind of an okay week. They didn't feel like it was the greatest week still. And I wonder if that changes if they finish off that game against Toronto. Forget the Ottawa game that they lose 6-1, because that's one that's kind of takes its toll right away. Like, you kind of see the result coming earlier. But if they finish off the game against Toronto, the second one, and come away, even if they win it in overtime, because forget the fact that they give up a point at the end and it gets tied. Okay, it gets tied. If you win it in overtime, though, then you're talking about a 6-point week out of a possible 8. Now it changes the tune a little bit. Now it feels like on a bit of a roll, 3 out of 4, more coming against the team you just beat up on Saturday. Turn that into something. And I look at the schedule, because you mentioned the 3 that are coming up against Ottawa, but Montreal's been struggling a lot. They've got them coming up on a schedule. They've got 2 more against Ottawa this month. It's like, and I'm not trying to jump too far ahead, because it's that you never want to do that in a season like this, especially, but there's opportunities here based on the way that these teams are. And you're going to play a decent number of them where you feel like you should be better. And if you can give that kind of performance, if you can give what we saw on Saturday, then you can get yourself right into this race and be right up there with the rest of them. And that's the opportunity they have, because Montreal is a good example of it, because Montreal is still hanging in a playoff spot right now. And that could be your playoff spot if you continue to trend upward and their trend continues the opposite direction and you take a couple games from them.
This Habs team makes no sense to me. I mentioned to you before, and I said it on the pod, that what they did was a knee-jerk reaction, and I didn't necessarily agree with it. And they made the change. They have lost 2 straight. And by the way, both the Winnipeg, they were up 2-0 against Winnipeg, and then they allowed 3 straight at one point after there were some other goals scored. But they had the lead, and then they just allowed Winnipeg to go out there and bang, bang, bang. I mean, you look at the game log afterwards, second period ending with Winnipeg goals, third period just cluttered with Winnipeg goals. What is going on? And then they lose in overtime the following night, or the following game, I should say. It wasn't a back-to-back situation, I don't think. But regardless, they made the change and nothing has happened. So what does that mean for this Canadiens team? And I always go back to saying they came out guns blazing, tearing it up, and it didn't make sense that they were that good. I didn't think they were that good. I mean, that scary? No way. Now there's a little bit of a reality check, and they made such a knee-jerk reaction move that I disagreed with. So it just puts them in this really uncomfortable spot, because what happens? Let's just say, hypothetically, they made the coaching change, and then they don't make the playoffs. GM fired?
Oh, quite possibly. Yeah. That's tough to say. I mean, it's too early to talk about it right now, but yeah,
Sure.
That's a good point. I'm going to go back to something that I talked about on the last episode about them, because I said, I remember saying then it's rare to find a break like they had where you get 6 days off from game action and then get to come back. And they were playing pretty well up to that point. I think they'd lost 3 out of 5, I believe, at that point, but they had started with that foundation of being in the playoff picture. And now they've lost every game coming back from that pause, and they fired their coach and one of their assistant coaches. And it feels like the tide is just turning in Montreal. It just feels like nothing can go their way. They're going to have an opportunity coming up because of the fact that we just talked about Calgary playing Ottawa again and how many games they have coming up. Well, Montreal gets Ottawa the day after. So Montreal's got a couple of days off and then gets to play Ottawa, who played on Monday night.
Isn't it kind of funny, though, that we point out Ottawa as like, look, this team can get going. They're playing Ottawa. It's like they're the
I was pointing it out,
child that gets kicked around in the closet.
I was pointing it out more for the back-to-back angle of it, because you've been sitting around for 2 days, and here comes a team that just played the night before, and may, depending on how well Calgary plays that game, if it's anything like Saturday, then they could kind of have gone through the ringer before coming in to play Montreal. But and then you got, look, they're going to play Winnipeg again in the course of the week. You got to figure out a way to turn it around. They've been in these games again. Like it's kind of the Flyers Bruins dynamic that I've talked about a little bit at different times too. You're in the games, but you're not finishing the games. They were in both of those games against Winnipeg this past week, but they didn't finish them off. And, I don't think that they're not going to quit on the idea of here's this new coach right away. They made this promotion from within. He's the guy for the rest of the year, and they're going to stand by it. It's how do the players respond? And that was the thing. Like, I think they came out and they scored right away. Like you said, it was 2-0 or 3-1 at one point in time in that first game. And it's like, oh, problem solved. You made a coaching decision. And yeah, maybe it seemed like a knee-jerk reaction when we were reacting to it, but there's not much else to say about it. Like, now there's a response, so maybe it was the right move. And just like that, the lead disappeared. They started playing sloppy again, and they took a loss, and it wasn't a good loss. And then they played and they lost in overtime, and it's like
that game stunk. That second game was awful. I mean, some games just have no flow to it, not a lot of scoring. Like even that we talked about Calgary and the Maple Leafs, that game where Nylander came out and really won it for them and stole it. That game was a snooze fest, and I would say the same with that Winnipeg one. But you got to find a way to win those snooze fests, and unfortunately, Montreal hasn't. And my eye is completely glued on Montreal sports radio right now because I love hearing them freak out. It's funny. So
the good news was that the night of the Winnipeg Montreal game that was not very entertaining, as you said, that was the same night as the Blues Sharks game. So you had one going at the same time that was more than entertaining, for everybody else. So that, if you can get those kind of to line up, then, you got to find one at every time slot, I think, that really wins you over. That's what,
point. That's a great point. So
there you go.
Yeah, there it is. I think there's Open Ice Hits episode. What are we now? 5 episodes into the books, huh? This starts
Yeah.
our third week. It flew by. Can't wait to see where this takes us, Durso. I'm excited.
Yeah, same here.
So thank you guys so much for listening to this episode, and we'll see you on Thursday.